Everyone got shy.
Brianna, are you a senior?
Yes, I am.
Very good.
Yeah.
Happy to have you here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Very excited.
You have an interest in trees or?
Yeah, in environmental stuff. I'm planning on going in environmental sciences when I go to college next year, so.
You're in Michigan Tech?
Yeah, I actually just, got accepted in Michigan Tech. I got my acceptance letter yesterday, so.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. That's where I'm leaning towards,
You
so.
can't beat that. We're
Yeah,
up there.
seriously.
Plenty of trees up
Yep.
That's where I spent the weekend.
Did you?
Oh, really?
I went up there Thursday and came back Sunday. I put 86 miles on my four-wheeler,
Wow.
just riding through the woods
Whereabouts?
over by Rapid River.
Where's that?
It's up about 2 hours north of Gratiot on Highway 2, just before Escondido.
Gotcha.
We got a 600-acre mission project there.
We just waited for you to see.
Yeah.
Did you get some snow? Did you get some snow?
Sunday morning, I woke up with frost on the
Yeah.
windshield.
You was
I had to let my truck run for about 10 minutes for a walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I seen it once.
It's so beautiful.
I seen it float in parade last.
Last time I was up there,
They just haven't,
I
just
saw
never had
a
an
pack
accident.
of wolves.
They're not,
You get a pack of them.
yeah, I'm always talking about
They were chasing the dog.
It was fun.
I didn't see any this time.
She's like, why do you need my email? So
Good
I
thing
was
about it.
like, all right,
I
I'll give
went
you
for a
my
walk.
It was fun.
We have our youngest son have a receptive handicap.
Oh, well,
Keeping up with
very well.
Yeah.
He just lives it up there.
I
We do too.
too.
And I have no idea.
Good pay.
They have some nice
Some sort of-
towns. They got little towns, some big towns, they got some restaurants, some shopping.
Do you work
They got just everywhere you look.
Keep it off the inside. That is so
She
good.
had this, you know, had this.
We were gonna
The
try to.
beer they grew there is really good.
Yeah, KBC, Never and Company. I have a t-shirt.
The, Pickaxe Lawndale,
Yeah.
the woman's picture that was on there, she was the bartender at the American Legion up there.
Oh, no kidding.
So, Buddy and I, we were sitting in the Legion having a couple before we went into the cabin.
No, it was, right after.
She says, "Do you guys ever try this?" And I said, "No," because I asked for Miller Lite.
Yeah.
She says, "Do you ever try this Pickaxe Lawndale?" I said, "No." She gave it to me and she says, "Does that picture look familiar?" I said, "Yeah, it's you. I identified you, so my beer's free, right?" So we drank quite a few beers. Then she took me, called over to the brewery and asked if she could bring us over there. And the beer,
You
he kept us through
Oh, well.
the
Yeah,
whole
I'll run the.
Yeah, did they bring downtown?
beer.
Yeah. Yeah, you have peanuts in here. Upscale burgers where you get like a steak dinner or whatever.
Yeah, no, this was just one.
Yeah.
It had no restaurant.
Yeah.
It had a tasting room in it.
Yeah.
He was brewing this, brown, Drawbridge Brown Ale.
I said all the names are clever names.
Yeah. And,
She did
so
say
he
she
says,
wanted
"Would you like to try it?" I said, "Sure." He says, "Well, it's really green."
I mean,
He says, "But it's just about ready." He says, "It's almost ready to can," so he drew me off a glass.
pretty sure
This stuff was gonna be good, too.
That sounds awfully fun.
It was
We
really
went
interesting.
on a tour of the Anheuser-Busch factory. I think it's the.
Yeah, I went through, New Georgia, Germany.
Yeah.
Oh, that was something.
We drank a lot of beer.
I don't see her out there, so if she comes.
Kolsch, you like Kolsch?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Ben.
How's it going?
Good, let's go. Okay, I think all who are going to be here are here, so I'll call this meeting to order. And the first order of business is approval of minutes.
I'll do the roll call first.
Oh,
So we have John Cubs. Here. Dana Mulder.
Here.
Sue Stewart. Here. Cece and Mark Gilbert are not here. Okay. Oh, and yeah, our new member, he doesn't have a name tag yet. Brianna Goldsmith. She's our student representative. This is our first tree board meeting. Last year, remember, we had, Matt, and unfortunately, we ended the year with COVID, so we didn't really get to finish out like we wanted to. So hopefully, Brianna can see a whole year through, but welcome, Brianna, and please feel free, like I talked to you, like to provide your input just like anybody else at this board. Or as kind of else does. Thanks.
Are there any comments on the minutes of the September 18 meeting? Changes needed? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I will make that motion.
Support?
Support?
All in favor?
Aye.
All against?
For CC is Mark on the phone or no?
No one's on the phone.
You want me to just dial up? You want me to dial it?
Yeah, if you want.
I can do that.
So, next is board communications, which is really any kind of communications. Tree board members want to bring. It's the last one. And see if I'll open it for public comment. Looks like we have a crowd.
Yeah, anybody who's here to join us want to say anything at this point?
Nothing but the crowd. Thanks for having us.
Of course.
All right, I'll go on to the old business. So item E1, the tree plan. So after a few months of other tree board activity and agenda items and other city items, I finally got around to the next section, the tree plan, which is really an analysis of our tree inventory and just kind of summing up, make an assessment of that tree inventory. I'm sure you all had an opportunity to just read it. My first question after I go through this is to see if there's any edits or to the text or whatever, and we can always change those. I just wanted to go through a basic review of the charts that we have up that I kind of summed up. And this tree inventory, remember, is it's 2015, so the data is a little outdated, but it's not terribly outdated. We have, we haven't planted that many more trees, or removed that many more trees since 2015. But things that might have changed are, as Brad probably can talk to, is like the size, the health condition, etc. Those things probably changed in the trees. But so I did a basic one table of the number of trees by species, and I tried to get them all. I used the species, the Latin terminology that we have, and also I searched for the common names there. So if I got anything wrong, just let me know. But as you can see, the maples at the bottom, those are, as we know, most numerous tree species. We have 114 sugar maple, 116 mulberry maple. We're also pretty heavy on some crab apples. You see there, sweet crab apple, 95 trees, and some cedar at the top, 53. So this chart is a good review of what species we have a lot of and which we don't have a lot of. Here's down the tree variety. I just lumped up all the types of maples, crab apples, spruces, cedars, all of them into one. See, maples form about 44%, crab apples 14%, spruce 9%, 7% for cedar. And then really, so we really have, 6-7 types of trees that make up about 3/4 of our tree, the rest are other species. And then this is city tree locations where we've done a tree inventory. So we haven't done a tree inventory in the entire city. Obviously, we haven't done a lot of the trees out in the west part of Harbor Springs or in between Lake and Third. But this is really, I think, Ben from Timberwolf, when you guys did a canopy size, showing the canopy sizes. So if you really zoom in on it, you'll see there's bigger circles for the bigger canopy sizes and smaller ones. But this was just to give an idea of where our trees in our inventory are located in the city. Then I kind of just did a little analysis based on tree size. And there's different ways that the tree inventory measures tree size. There's diameter at breast height. There's spread of the trees, the limbs, as well as trunk area. So for DBH, these are in inches. We have a lot that are about 400 or 500 that are under 18 inches at DBH, and then drastically fewer as you go higher and bigger. So here's just one showing proportion of the different DBH in inches. About, again, you have a third of them that are in that 6-inch to 12-inch range, a fourth that are under 6 inches, and then very few that are, less than 1% each over the 30 inches. So it's just gives you a good see what sizes we're talking about here. And then when it comes to trunk area of trees, this is also in square inches. And 400 out of about 730 that are in our tree inventory. 400 are less than 100 square inches of trunk area.
How's it measured, Ben?
Square inches of trunk diameter?
Yes.
It would be the square of the radius times pi,
Gotcha.
54 inches above the ground. So cross-sectional area
It's a cross section.
at 54 inches above the ground.
And
These trees, are these city-owned trees?
these are
Trees in the right of way?
These are trees, for the most part, trees in the right of way. Some of them include trees at some of our parks as well,
Okay.
at the waterfront. And I think some at Kiwanis too, we have in inventory, but it's not a complete inventory. But it's only city. So then again, percentage of trees per trunk area, it just shows the growth percentages. So then since about 400 were under 100 square inches, we have those broken down as well, so you can get a grasp of what range those fall in. Most of them are under 20 square inches, so again, relatively small trees. Very few are on the high end. And spread is the other one we have for measuring size, and spread in feet is how we did it. We have about, I'd say 350 or so that are that have a spread that's under 20 feet, and then only a dozen that are above 50 feet. So again, we are on the smaller size for spread, and that's not always necessarily a bad thing, especially when you're around utilities, but it is toward the smaller end. Again, this is just another breakdown by spread percentage-wise. And then we have a section here for the health and site conditions. Ben has a rating system of 0 to 5 for the health of trees. 0 being it's a dead tree, so we don't have any on our chart that are dead because they usually get removed for the most part only relatively quickly. But we also have no 5. So 5 would be the trees and all the conditions are perfect and right for it to guarantee long-term survival. And Ben, correct me if I'm wrong in describing this. But
Would it be better to elaborate? Or?
no, just if I'm wrong.
Okay.
If I'm generally wrong. But so basically, you go to 0. The closer you are to 0, the less likely the tree is healthier, likely to survive long-term. A rating of 4, for example, is it's more likely to survive. It has most of the conditions necessary or attributes necessary to ensure long-term survival. As you go lower, the likeliness of long-term survival decreases. So if we break it down by the conditions, most of them fall in that average rating between 2.5 and 3.5. We have no trees at 5. We have 5 that are ranked as 4.5, and this was of course but most rank in that 3 area between 2.5 and 3.5. So neither that many are that terrible, but not that many are that great. And there's a lot of different factors that go into that condition rating. That's broken down by percentage as well. One thing I wanted to mention is also that in this section, we talk about, in the tree inventory, we talk about, for specific trees, there's a note section for if there's any particular issues we find with those trees. So if there's diseased limbs, broken limbs, a sign of pest or anything like that, then we note that on the notes section. And then, or if there's like located by utilities or in certain areas that aren't conducive to perhaps the health of the tree, those notes are also taken there as well. And after going through all this data, I came up with a few potential goals. I was trying to stick to goals just specifically about the inventory, not necessarily about what we want to do. It's easy to say, oh, we need more trees here and we need more trees there, but I want to try to keep the goals about the inventory. So I had a goal of updating the tree inventory count every 10 years to count for newly planted trees. And I talked with Ben about that, 5 might be too, if we do it every 5, since we're a small city, every 5 years might only account for a few dozen trees. But 10 years gives us, you'll see a bigger difference every 10 years. But we might want to do a biannual assessment of the health of each tree. So have more walk-arounds for the conditions of the tree if they survive. So that's why I put that as goal 3.5.2. 3.5.3, ascertain locations that are underrepresented in the trees with our inventory. This kind of data can show us, which. Create a map that shows location by species. So that's just really, I guess, giving that data, that GPS data, just really matching it with the data we have currently. Species. Because we have tag numbers, right?
And species.
Yeah. So
It's all recorded when the trees are recorded.
exactly. So we could easily create that different time. But I think it would be nice to show, because we talked about not wanting to have the same species in one particular area of town. If we have a map showing where different varieties are, that would help. Assess the amount of water each tree approximately receives. We talked about irrigation and water here. Right now, our tree inventory doesn't account for that because it's really hard to do it based on measuring rainfall, but not we don't have irrigation. Indicate trees that are near utility poles or other city infrastructure that may pose a problem for the tree or utilities or infrastructure. Just a good way to have a map or a way to visualize, all right, these trees may be trimmed in a few years because they'll be interfering with an electric utility or something. And create a potential planting location list based off of the inventory. So those are my goals, and this is my section, my data on the tree inventory. So
A question about the inventory every 10 years. Is there a way to enter new trees into the database but indicate that they've been entered not by survey, but because we know where they are because we planted them?
The short answer is yes.
Okay. Some way to provide notes on that or add
Well-
a field that says,
Yeah, I mean, we can provide a note if the species has changed or something like that. I mean, right now there's consecutive numbers that indicate the trees that have been monitored since 2000. And, sometimes those plants get changed and stuff like that. Number is really relevant to the place that it occupied. So we can change the data inside that tag number, fairly easily. I mean, it should actually more likely be referred to as a location number. And then I think that would correlate with what Victor's already saying of goals, is that we have location numbers spread throughout the city, and then we just indicate what is filling that location or site. Whether it's a tree or a shrub or it's empty and needs to be replanted, we can track that.
and then we talked also about the potential for a kind of like a staggered tree inventory when we do some of these things, like, maybe every 2 years do one section of the town and then do another section of the town later when we want to
I think that
unless that Sue's option is a better option, just as we plant new trees.
well, in terms of, the only thing that it does if we add trees as we plant them is keeps the number and count up to date. The health assessments are not going to be up to date unless you survey in between those 10-year points.
health in trees is difficult because the response the tree has is relative to like a pathogen is very slow relative to like humans. Like, you know, we may see things like infections of some types of fatal infestations, like emerald ash borer. We don't even know the trees have symptoms before they're, you know, they've been infested for 2 or 3 years, and that may be too late.
But the condition rating, for example, though, like, you know, that's.
Condition rating can change
Yeah.
slowly. And I mean, if we have a storm, we can have breakage and stuff like that,
Yeah.
but, and let's not confuse the condition and, health of the tree can be viewed as 2 different things. So, you know, we look at condition, we're looking at potential to fail and some of the health, but you may have a tree that's got a structural defect that has good biological health, and that can be a problem because it doesn't equate to how mammals or even insects live.
Thanks.
Victor, could you put that aerial photo back up again?
I read.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's good. I think it's really helpful. In looking at this, I had a couple of things to talk about. One, what do we need to do to finish the inventory in the rest of the city? Because like west of state, we have just a ton of red oaks that aren't really being counted. You know, like if we're saying, oh, 3% maples, well, that might change if all the rest of the trees were counted. So that's one thing. So, maybe that's sooner than later, just so we have a picture of the whole city.
And if I may, the original drive for beginning to keep an inventory on city trees was the trees between the road and the sidewalk.
Right.
And so where it becomes a little bit more ambiguous is in areas where there might not be a sidewalk present or an indication of where city property ends. And so traditionally, when we started this project with Fred Guter, we stayed away from areas like in smaller neighborhoods, like, you know, actually both above and below the bluff, just because we don't have a lot of good data. It's really the kind of the downtown area where we've got, you know, really easy to follow indications as to where things are. Some of this we can work on. Once the sites are established and we log them, we can keep after that.
I think that's a good point, Dan, and Ben also. I think really comes down to, you know, how much, you know, it takes some work. So I don't know, it's about paying the arborists or the contractors to actually go out there and spend the time to do that. So, I mean, I think it's a good goal. I just don't know when, you know, Ben, when we did this the last time, I mean, how long did this take you guys to do this inventory?
Like 3 months. I mean, part of it is that a lot of this stuff happens in the wintertime, and so some of that may be conditions. You know, fingers and D-tapes don't like to move quite as well as they do in the summer, but one of the problems we run into in the summertime is that we've got canopy closure. So using, you know, global positioning, it doesn't work as well when you've got leaves. It's easier to actually locate that stuff when it's cold out. So
I'd like to see that as a goal, though, that we finish this, if it could have an impact on decision-making, right? And then another thing that really struck me in looking at this map is, I know that this just deals with street and park trees, but if we're, you know, trying to tackle some of the bigger issues, diverse would be very useful for us, not to count every tree in the city on private property, but just do some sampling. Like, what are our other species? And just so we can kind of see where we are. You know, the urban forest is not just street and park, it's
Some sort of
everything.
sampler survey, you know, informal, like asking residents, because we have to go onto, you
Yeah.
know, private property. You know, otherwise, it's just judging from the sidewalk, and, which
I would-
may be easy for someone like that.
I know, and not to do the whole city, but just to say like, you know, randomly pick some blocks or something like this and say, yeah, this is what else is here.
Any thoughts on that?
You just look at that map and there's just so much more canopy than where the little green dots are.
Do we have remote sensitive imaging to work from? Anything that's detailed enough or,
So large areas, like if we're looking at areas like Harbor Point, I mean, a lot of that stuff where it's not planted trees in right of ways.
Well, those aren't in the city either.
But any of those areas that are larger tracts, we could look at what, I mean, when we're talking about things like red oaks and maple distribution, if we're talking about like native trees that are growing as volunteers between houses that have been there for a while, that would show up on a soil survey map. I mean, so like potentials for what we would see with the soil climate, and that's been well logged by the USGS.
I think that would be valuable information to have though, like just even look at the Glen Drive neighborhood.
I think a good point here is even this nature conservancy, it's public land, essentially, it's a nature conservancy, just even like a idea of the kind of species that are there, because that's a huge part of our forests in the city. Is this.
And that would be well represented in an NRCS map. I mean, that's readily available. We can generate those pretty quickly.
So that's-
I mean, in forestry, you do transects or other types of point collections or plot collection, and it would give you a flavor of the population, but it wouldn't give you an exact population.
That's probably all we need though, right?
I would point out that probably more relevant to the city canopy though are the trees that are in city property that are close to roads that we don't know exactly where they are before we start going into unoccupied areas. It is interesting to know what is on the Nature Conservancy property, but we're not looking at the stuff that is potentially a liability for the city, that is on city property. So, you know, when we see the checkerboard north of Lake Street, there's some huge absences in what we have logged there. And even north of, you know, like Bluff, there's a lot of city right-of-way there where there's a lot of liability and exposure. And part of the reason that the city inventory started was because we were looking at tree failures that were causing loss and whose responsibility it was to keep the public safe. And so I would suggest that maybe Tree Board thinks about like prioritizing, saying, yes, it's a good idea to know how many trees and what types of trees we have growing in the city, but let's look at the trees that are actually going to affect people's safety first.
Can we get an overlay, like a GIS map with an overlay of the city property? An overlay of ownership, I should say, an ownership layer?
Yeah, I think that's a conversation to have with, I believe,
Jeff?
Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff can do that later, yeah.
Yeah, and so like that just, unfortunately, a lot of this work that was being done was Jocelyn. So, you know, part of what we have to do is kind of change gears and pull that stuff back out, but that is movable and readily movable, so I think that's not a problem.
All right, yeah,
Great.
so-
And I was actually gonna say, it would be nice to see the city property lines on that map.
Mhm. Yeah, because I think there's a lot more information out there that we can get into before we have to go put feet on the ground and do our own survey work. So if we round that stuff up first and see where we are and then go ask the question on the ground.
Victor, how much of that floodplain behind my house does the city own?
Well, the shade
Is that
drain,
all private?
you're talking about the shade drain, Deep?
Yeah.
On Lake Street, down here, fine. I mean, we own a substantial part of it. I mean, the shade drain is essentially, I mean, from the south of Lake Street, the city, pretty sure.
There's a lot of those red oak just breaking off back there.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my bearings here, but yeah, it's right here. Any other thoughts, questions on edits? I mean, we'll bring this back with punch,
Yeah,
grammar and stuff.
let's see.
Sorry, I have the page.
I don't know if this falls under this tree inventory and assessment section or if it's something different. And maybe this, we start with a question to Ben is the arborist perspective different than the forest ecology perspective? And would that kind of broaden our base of understanding if we, like, I think George Pete has a background in forest ecology, and it might broaden our perspective to hear all viewpoints. Like, you know, when I went to school, and this was very long ago, so it's probably changed, but there was always a concern about introducing non-native species as the potential for outcompeting native species.
Well, I mean, to address that directly, we've already done that. I mean, most of the things that we see as being invasive species in this area are easily moved by birds and wildlife, and they were planted as, as garden stock for most people that are on, the north side of 119. We see those movements fairly easily. At this point, the question would be, what do you do with that? We can expend huge amounts of money and energy trying to revert it back to a species that we find more desirable, but the question I would ask is why? If that changes the land use, then that would be a reasonable, I think it would be a reasonable expenditure, but in instances, having plant material on the ground is more important, I think, than worrying about whether or not it started its life cycle on this continent, in the last 10,000 years or not. A lot of the things that we have as landscape trees are non-native trees. I mean, blue spruce shouldn't be on this side of the Rocky Mountains, but we have a lot of them in Harbor
Yeah,
Springs.
Japanese alcova and just Japanese tree lilac. I don't think any of those probably are going to outcompete our native species, but
Well, Norway maple is a really good
good
example.
example, yeah.
I mean, in many parts of the state, they're actually being rubbed out because they cause damage. As far as Asian species that are problems, I mean, Oriental bittersweet is horrible, and it's constantly moving inside the city. Difference between arboriculture and I guess I can't attest to what George Pete's area would be, is that deal with growing trees and woody species. I mean, so all inputs, but also the interactions of humans and these systems. So, the difference between forestry and arboriculture is how involved humans are. Our threshold to deal with a tree like around City Hall is immense. But from a forestry issue, it doesn't make any sense to ever treat a disease. It would either be destroyed or allowed to grow. Things like risk assessment are usually not calculated in forestry because there aren't dwellings and large numbers of people. So I think that, arboriculture would probably be more accurate than systems ecology at this point, because we have, strongly influenced systems that are really dependent on every little movement that humans make. I mean, from opening the car doors to interrupting vascular tissue, to, what we do with, holiday decorations. And that may not be relevant to whether or not we, are worried about whether attachment honeysuckle is spreading across open areas.
Well, and if I just interject there, so when we get this tree plan all together, it'll go in front of the public for review and comment. So I think that opportunity for someone who might be like, George Peete, someone that has expertise and wants to point out something to add to this or to bring a different perspective. I don't know if, for the purpose of doing our tree plan right now, I don't know if that's the best use of our time.
I think also when we get into the materials from the Arbor Day Foundation, the kinds of professional organizations that Ben's involved with, those have gotten more integrated with ecology than they were, say, 20 years ago. There's been a lot of influence of forest ecology in urban forestry circles, and our people at the state DNR guy, whose name I'm blanking on right now, but sort of our resource person there, is a good source for that kind of thing. Because there are some issues that those people have brought into the discussion that traditionally our arboriculturalists would not have paid attention to, but it's pretty, like Morton Arboretum's pretty up on it, and so all the more reason to use these materials from elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm not even sure what the question is exactly. It's just,
Right.
We used to consider natural forest succession, as a goal to kind of strive for and not let things that filter. We're talking street trees, which is another whole animal. But anyways, I think we're getting off topic, so I withdraw my question.
It'll come up again.
Any other questions about this topic, this section? Well then my next goal is, we have two more sections left. And first I was gonna throw out there, if anyone wanted to work on one of these sections, just that might have more experience than me. But the planting, there's a planting guidance section that talks about species diversity, aesthetic criteria, physical constraints, develop landscapes surrounding street trees, so tree bases. And then there's a tree maintenance protection procedure, so watering, feeding, trimming and pruning, control of disease, removal of trees, placement of trees, tree informed, did not finish that, and retribution.
What is tree informing?
I think it's supposed to be tree information, but I just cut it out.
I'd be happy to take a study.
And this doesn't need to be the original
No,
thought here.
right, yeah. What you guys are, Dan, are you?
I'll take, I could take under planting guide B and D. Yep.
Okay, yeah, you guys have some experience with EDA.
Yeah, D.
Great. And I know, so you did a previous.
Yeah.
So that was,
And I'm happy to work on other pieces. None of this is really what I
no,
have any background in, so I would just be plagiarizing somebody else's work, which,
As you said, but we don't need to recreate the wheel here.
that's right. We don't need to get too creative or original.
well, exactly. So Dan, if you do section 4B and D, then I can do the rest, and I can do section 5. I can work on a little bit with Ben on section 5, tree maintenance issues, because we talk about that a lot, about,
Is that there's a lot available generally
yeah,
on those sections, but the trick is to talk about how those things work out in Harbor Springs, given that we're a small city, sandy soils, partial underground watering system, all the special issues here.
all right. Any questions from, I guess, the audience?
I think I could help with tree information too.
Okay,
Maybe
thanks.
that's like kind of, yeah, thing we're gonna talk about today, the trees for success or whatever we're gonna call it.
Thanks, Dan.
You could assign any one of those that you like.
You took the parks. Any other thoughts on this? No? Then I guess we can go on to finalizing the approved city trees list. And I wasn't here last meeting, so I don't know where we ended it up. There was some delegation of we're gonna combine the two or different lists. I don't know. That was something.
We
I was
did,
supposed to
yeah,
do.
we did combine it. I think everybody was gonna look it over.
And then was gonna,
Ben was gonna do
the
it.
minutes specifically referenced by looking at this, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, Ben.
Well, else.
I have to admit, I have no feelings on it either way. We've had, in the past 20 years, probably 4 lists that we come up with, and every time we implement a list, we find that some species work really well, and some species do not. At one point, I think we suggested Turkish filbert, and none were ever planted. So I don't think that anything should be carved in stone, because it seems like every time we do this, it fails. It's kind of like when we find the perfect street tree and we plant like lots and lots of them, and then Dutch elm disease shows up and kills most of them.
Well, I think that's the intent, is this would be
A living document.
living document, yeah. And Victor, we were talking about this kind of for 2 purposes. One for our use on tree board,
Mhm.
just as a reference, and then whether this might be something we can make available to residents that maybe need some help and, I want to put in a street tree, what could I consider?
Dan, did you look at the list that Gal Litzenberger and Mark came up with previous to this one?
I was given 2 lists, I don't know who came up with what list, so I think I probably did, yeah. Yeah, there was some kind of, you and I talked about some of this, some stuff that just wouldn't be really too practical.
Well, I mean,
A, if they're not commercially available, or B,
there's some fascinating things that have been mentioned and listed, and some of those, I hear more and more people want to plant black gums because they'll grow in southern Michigan, but there's not much data that would indicate that they would survive here, but we may find some success every once in a while,
Yep.
along with catalpas. and just to add on to that conversation, is there a way that we can get public involvement to try some of these things? I mean, with the idea that they may fail.
Well, maybe that could be another column for the list is, we'll do better in a sheltered location type of thing. So that could include things like dogwoods and blackgums, for example.
Well, and some dogwoods will do well. I mean, Coosa dogwoods, it's a little bit hard, but like Florida dog, the flowering dogwood would have. a
Yeah,
really
those are
hard
both on the list, so,
Does someone have that list combined? Can you send that to me?
you should have it from, last month's package.
And do you have that in the materials? Because I wasn't here last time.
It is in there, yeah.
Do you have it on your PC though?
I had the two separate, I had the two different ones.
Didn't everybody get this in their packet?
This, for this meeting?
No,
last
last
meeting.
meeting, last meeting.
Yeah, so I have that.
You have it, all right. And if you can send that to me.
Yeah.
Then that's the combined, that's the final list that's combined. Then we'll use that one as our official suggested. City approved trees. And then we can use it, like you said, for both purposes. For us, and helping us.
Yeah, so I guess one thing we were gonna talk about is, are there any additional information? So I hadn't gotten that far, but there's the 2 pages that have lists for small, big and evergreen, I think were the categories. Yeah, different conifers. Then there was backup information and pictures. So I would be happy, in the next few months when things slow down, to flesh this out the rest of the way. That'd be great.
Yeah.
And then if anybody wants to send me a note if they do think of, I think just the first page would just be most helpful to be super simple with the name of the tree, the size, and is it suitable for sweet trees. But if anybody thinks of another column, it's super important, we can add that.
Experiment. Cacti.
Dawn redwoods.
Okay, no.
Just another
No, you don't want
thought
to do
that
that.
just,
We tried that. It doesn't work very well.
No?
yeah. Another thought that just came to mind too is sharing this with the local landscapers.
Yeah,
That if these are the things that are recommended in the city, they might want to consider at least trying to stock some of them. Because I think some of them then will agree, just you can't get them up here, you have to bring them
that's fair. Any other thoughts on? Nope. All right, let's move on to becoming a tree city. So, talked with Mark a little bit about this, and Mark could not be here because of that jury. So.
You couldn't get out for this.
We tried.
They don't know Mark.
So basically, become a Tree City USA, I'm sure some of you are familiar, there's 4 standards, 4 criteria that we have to meet. One is to have a tree board or tree department, success, we have that. The second is to have tree care ordinances, and we have different types of tree ordinances regulating trees. I don't know if this tree, if what they mean by tree care ordinance necessarily is the same thing as we have tree care policy. And we don't necessarily have an ordinance saying that we must take care of trees this way, but I think what we have should be fine. Third one is a community forest tree program with an annual budget of at least $2 per capita. And that is something that, what I have to sit down with Nick and to really figure out, this $2 per capita, how much do we really spend on trees? From arborist time to DPW time to staff time. And then do we count the donations that we get from people as part of that money for spending on trees? We get $500 for donation. We got $14,000 from Mr. Fennick. Does that count as our $2 per capita on average? I'm not quite sure. But we don't, because we don't ever had a tree budget. So that's the one that I think that might be the only question mark here is figuring out that exactly. And then the standard 4 is an Arbor Day observance and proclamation, which we can do.
Believe it or not, that was the biggest obstacle to taking this up when tree board first began work.
That's why he says this is the least challenging. Right there.
Yeah,
It's just ironic.
yeah,
Why was it an issue? Why was it an obstacle?
because the feeling was that in order for this to make sense, it would have to happen during the summer, and we're not adding anything during the summer. And I don't think either of those things is true. I think that, that some willingness on the part of city staff to do this is all that we need, and we're there.
So Arbor Day celebration can be simple and brief and an all day or all week observation. I imagine we would go with an all week observation, but we do something for a few hours on a day.
Just start small.
Yeah, and it can include tree planting event, tree care activities, or an award that honors leading tree planters. That's,
Mr. Bennett. That's all right.
and way to get children. I don't think this should be an issue for us. It's just, as you said, finding the right day to do it, where we can get significant public involvement if we want that, and figuring out what we want to do. Do we want to do tree planting, the tree education thing, where our friendly arborist gives a tour of the different types of trees and how to take care of them for children? I don't know, whatever it may be, we can think of something.
So
But schools,
close to Arbor Day, because that's in April.
No, it doesn't have to be on.
I mean, does it have to be more than like we put a cupcake with a candle on it right next to the phone thing? Next tree board meeting and call it good?
Doesn't need to be, as far as I can tell. I think, we do something as simple as having a table at the farmer's market on a Wednesday in the summer or a booth or whatever,
With a cupcake.
so what's involved in giving away saplings? That's what I'm familiar with.
getting the trees from a good source and giving people enough direction that they don't kill them.
So that
Those
could be
are the-
super fun to do at farmer's market and like getting the trees. Somehow I thought that the Arbor Day Foundation gave you the trees.
I think there are
They
places
will
to
sell us the trees.
go, is-
Okay,
but I think maybe DTE or, I think there may be
Yeah.
another source of free.
I think, yeah, starting small, something small. I think it's a simple check. I think it should be a simple check first. And then a few hours of planning, a few hours of day. I think that's why you guys are all volunteered as well, so care about trees. So, we can have someone man a farmer's market booth, or a woman at a farmer's market booth.
Person.
A person.
And what's the benefit of being a tree city? Pardon me.
You get a flag that you can fly.
A
A
flag.
sign.
does it
and you
open
can
up
put it
grants
on your,
though?
it probably, yeah, it may help some with
I
getting
think I read
grants.
that it does.
It helps with what?
With
With
getting
getting grants.
Grants, okay.
Grants, it's like, there's many benefits to it in that sense, and they're not huge benefits all at once, but, you get the recognition, you get that attention of, all right, this, you go to the map as a city that cares about trees and is being proactive with it. You get more points for when it helps out with grants. If you can say, if you're looking for money specifically for trees, obviously if you're a tree city, you're more likely to show that you care about this issue as opposed to someone who just wants money. So I think there's those benefits. Is it gonna be like, this big all of a sudden, people I know, but it's gonna be something that we can get the community around.
Yeah.
And, just another positive thing for the people. And the flag. We're a sign.
Well,
We all want more signs in town.
Yeah. Let's talk about science, Richard.
I think this would also be a great way to tie in with that idea of what can we do to get residents to plant trees, so we don't have to pay for every tree that goes in, and maybe this is like a matching thing with the city, or maybe it's like landscapers partner with us to give like a discount during the Arbor Day week or something.
Yeah, I think so. I think we can do that. So maybe the time to start planning for something like that, when should we aim for something like that? So I think we have to have the celebration before we can apply to be a true city, right? I think that's the way the standards are written, is that you have to complete all 4 of these standards. I mean,
It's a simple thing to look up, and again, I think that the person we've worked with at Urban Community Forestry that's part of Michigan DNR Eagle, they have a good connection with that program, and and help cities get this certification.
So maybe, Brianna, we could also see if anyone in the school wants to, part of this Arbor Day, maybe do something with the school.
Yeah, the frost has to be out of the ground, right?
What's that?
Frost has to be out of the ground if we're gonna
Yeah,
plant a tree.
so June.
June. Seriously.
From June to June 15th.
It's probably a little early, but maybe
Yeah.
we should have a tree board subcommittee for Arbor Day. If you're interested in working on it. I would be interested.
Yeah, let's revisit it.
I
think.
would also.
Okay, great.
Let's revisit it back in the winter time, like February, March.
After the holidays.
Yeah.
So we have a subcommittee then?
Well, not yet,
Yeah.
We'll get there. We'll see there's interest. Yeah.
And Brianna, would you be on it?
Yep.
Great, okay,
So
cool.
we have interest for subcommittee, so maybe in January. we can
Yeah.
have that, so. Remind me in case I forget. I'll have a note.
This is kind of a related question, it might be slightly off topic from Arbor Day. And that is, I think it would be great if the tree board can make a presentation to council about what we're doing, what we accomplished this year, things that we're talking about accomplishing next year. And, I don't know if we have a budget, or, yeah, I guess we have a budget, right? Or, I don't know, maybe
It's
we
a
should have a
standard
budget.
It's not a set budget, but we have money, certain money.
Yeah, and if we do have some programs in mind, maybe this is where we introduce the idea of the city, partnering with us, Parks and Rec partnering with us.
Well, I
So,
mean-
just timing wise, I think it'd be great to try and do it before the capital budget planning process in November, right?
Or do we shoot for next year's?
I'm thinking it might just be, because it might be a lot to get in for capital improvement. Our capital improvements plan is really about projects that are over $10,000. So I really, but I think once we get this going, I think that's gonna be, I imagine we'll have this done-ish, ready to go to council by January, this tree plan, so a couple more months of, I think once we got that, but maybe in the late winter, early spring, a presentation to council about, before, or whenever before we bring this to council, because I think that those two coinciding together would really, enlighten the council as well as the public about this. So I think trying to get a presentation, similar to what the DDA may be doing with a presentation to
Yeah.
council this
Yeah.
next Monday, I think.
That's what made me think about.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, just might be too soon. Try to-
John, do you think like a little 10-minute slideshow of, here's what tree board's doing this year, or would you think next year would be just fine?
I think there a little more work
Just wait.
behind it, to have some meat behind it, so the council has more to go on.
Maybe this
Okay.
spring, I think, yeah, or like, winter. But I think that's a great idea, because really, the council only hears about the tree board when I say the tree board has recommended, something. Beyond that, they don't get much.
To me, it's the next step. The tree board has become a lot more active, but understanding more about the financial end of it, what you have to work with, and really what the plan is to use
Right,
going forward would be, and you're not gonna have that done
Right.
overnight.
Right.
I'd take my time and do it right.
But yeah, I'll put that on the list of future.
that does bring up kind of a related question, though. This is my first year, but do we have sort of an end of year planning session? This is what we'd like to do for next year.
We have,
do
so
it as
really,
we go?
the tree board has really been for a while, basically informal. There was no, as you know, there was no board or anything, like no, officers, nothing like that. It was advisory, essentially the city manager. So now we're trying to get it more formalized. So I think a planning session, one of the meetings maybe in December or January of next year is to here's our goals for the year. I think that's not a bad idea. But we haven't really done that. We've kind of just taken on issues as they come when it comes to tree plantings. So this is, I think part of the goal of the tree plan was to kind of help us get us focused on certain things that we want to work on. So
I think it'd be good to work on budget too, because like we're saying, well, it'd be great if Ben could finish the rest of the city with the inventory, and it'd be great if Ben could have a better understanding of, the use of the sprinkler system, all
Yeah.
that. So those are budgetary things, right?
Well, and that's what will take some time to define, you know, what are the objectives, what are the goals and objectives? When do we want to have them done? How much money do we have? What's it gonna cost? Fundraising, yeah. Come into that discussion.
Another aspect of that too is, for example, Ben had for many years not always been charging the city what he should be. So like, he might have put a lot of time in it, but really didn't send the city many bills for what he was doing. But so it's like, so it was not a good way to assess exactly what we're spending on trees from the arbor's point of view. So there's a lot of, still some more information, but since we're gonna be doing it for the tree, for Arbor Day, for Tree City recognition, I'll be sitting down with Nick and I'll just, it's not gonna be accurate. I mean, we're just gonna be talking about rough estimates of what we spend on trees, because to take from DPW, not only gotta take, actual work they do, but then you gotta count their labor. The DPW guy is spending time trimming a tree, that counts as part of, this money for, our electric department, we have to trim trees for trees that are in the way of utilities, so you have to take their salary and all that, so there's a lot that goes into it, but, and there's obviously Ben's work, and then the donations we receive, everything comes together.
And maybe volunteer time.
Yeah.
You can monetize the time spent by volunteers and probably tree board meetings and other
Exactly.
stuff.
Volunteer time, and I know that business in Vermont pay things like minimum wage and a half or something like that. They have a set scale for how much you pay a volunteer.
Yeah.
Or how much you would count a volunteer. So,
That's good information for us to have, because it's sometimes useful or necessary for grant applications as well.
and it is on, ironically enough, it's not ironically, but it's on our tree, it's in our tree plan, other sections, the goals. We had that goal of figuring out how much it actually costs to work on trees in the city. So, any other thoughts on this section before we go on to our brief? So I just added this really quickly, was that we had Sue's parents, David and Ann Irish, have donated a tree in memory of Sue's cat Myrtle. So we thank your parents. Her cat just passed away.
Sorry to cut you off.
So I got you for the Ann, and we thank you for that. So then maybe we'll get to another, not this meeting, but another meeting, figure out, we have another tree that's been donated, talk about locations. And then I think we just got one 2 days ago, Andy, another donation. Yesterday, yeah. And that was for, who was that for?
It was for a lady named Marjorie Wilkins,
It's just us.
who vacationed here for 30, 40 years, so she passed away. Lived in Beverly Hills, and her friends and family donated $500.
Super.
We had-
Would it be the potential to use some of those donated trees in the proposed planning here?
We've talked about, we can basically put those trees where we want. I know, so for example, when we applied for that grant that Mark Gilbert applied for trees, some of those trees may be used, they're doing it for this landscaping part, but we don't have that. Mark said he hasn't heard back yet on the final details of that grant award. But we could use that, but generally this was a separate project, so we kind of set aside some money, but we could always put it there. But I think we've talked about the need to look at different areas of town for these trees.
And just saying it's kind of premature right now, what we've been dealing with about planting them in the parks, and we don't really have like a plan.
Yeah, no, we definitely,
We'll get there, we're just
yeah,
not there
definitely.
yet.
But I think maybe at the next meeting, or we have to do that next meeting, just to know that we have a couple of donations that we haven't planned yet, that we'll have to figure out what to do for the springtime. Whether it's for this project or a park or another right of way somewhere else in town.
Do we have an update on the Fennec tree planting?
Yep, so Ben, you have the trees
Yep.
and he's waiting for snow. No, I'm just kidding. It can't get-
It is actually easier to move them if the leaves come off. So, cold weather is nice because they go into dormancy and then we don't have to worry about burning them. Because if you put them on the back of a truck and drive 50, it's 50-mile-an-hour winds. And if you're driving into the wind, then it might be 80-mile-an-hour winds. So it will be a little bit easier if we do it right before everything freezes up hard and people kind of disappear from downtown. It seems like we've got a lot of traffic.
Expectations for that, a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, maybe a little longer.
I would like to shoot for 2 weeks, but I'd like to play it by ear too. I mean, the first thing I'd like to do is get the Clark tree
Oh, yeah.
location for that, and then get that in place first. So,
So that's going,
Ginger, yeah. So, a couple weeks.
Super. Well, that'll be fun to see those trees go in.
everybody's bored.
We did get a
Shovel.
request from Sarah Ford at the Petoskey Harbor Community Foundation to see if our youth advisory could be involved in planting those. I know we've talked about these are gonna be bigger trees, and with COVID, we don't know if we're gonna be able to have some of the youth.
It is, I think that there's some things that they can do, but that they're gonna be placing the trees that people have to be, in intimate contact with the tree and other people.
Yeah.
It'd probably be better if people that are already isolated together, stay together.
That's why we kind of last time said no to NHS, because we just don't want those, they're heavier trees and social distancing.
Once those are planted, what would be the frequency of watering?
Well, that's a hard one because it depends on what the weather does. So this time of year, and that's the other joy, is that once the buds are hardened off and we lose the leaves, we don't have to worry about, or effectively lose the leaves. These are all white oak groups, so they're not gonna drop leaves, they're just gonna turn brown, and they'll hold them from the spring. But the water requirement's minimal, so we don't have to do anything for, next spring, and in spring it may be wet, but, middle of July, we may need to be watering a lot.
Do we have a means like, any kind of truck or gator bags or
So
something?
the discussion with the city has been that we will place gator bags on the trees, and we're still working out who's gonna be responsible for filling those. The DPW does have a truck with a tank and a pump. And I would like to see more discussion about what we might want to do or not do as far as how we deal with this, because like even the city of Petoskey has a water crew that goes through and waters a lot of stuff. And we can see our planting successes go way up if we can water, more often than we have been.
I know it's getting later, but I just think it would be awesome if we could deep water every tree at least once. Get it settled in.
Well, I mean, we do want to settle the air out of the root system so that we don't have any settling over the winter or when it gets wet again. And that isn't impossible, especially for Main Street. You can just run a pump truck for that, but.
Yeah, I guess we'll talk at staff, but I know we've all been kind of talking about how we're going to do that, so we're still figuring that out. Exactly what that's going to be.
Do we, do you need to do bark protection on those
It would not be a bad idea to put trunk wraps on them, and actually that'd be a good conversation to have. I'm certainly willing to wrap the stems at the time of planting with craft paper. I prefer the plastic guards because they last longer, but that's going to have to fit in with what everybody wants to see.
Is it kind of two issues though? Like one is the bark freezing and then the other is mechanical damage from string trimming?
Well, the bark is, what we're worried about I guess that would be, if we were to do something like a plastic trunk protector, usually that would suit two needs. If we wrap with craft paper in the first year, it will help keep, cut down on sun scalding, which I think is what you're talking about, is the bark freezing. And it's actually, so for everybody else, if trees aren't well shaded on the stems, and the stems are exposed, especially if there's reflective issues where sun is hitting snow and then bouncing into the stem, it's going to warm the tree up. What will happen is the tissues that are dormant will wake up, and so they start to hydrate. When that happens, and then it gets cold out at night, then those tissues freeze and they die. And then we end up with big dead spots on the south side or the west side, or where the reflective light is sometimes on the north side if they're on the south side of a white building. And so protecting those stems until the trees get bigger is important. And then the other issue is seeing, protecting the base of the tree so that when we're maintaining areas that have turf, we're not tearing up the circulatory tissue in the tree. Because trees, unlike humans, have all their circulatory tissue very close to the surface. And even though we think that string trimmers are great and they don't do damage, they actually will kill a tree fairly quickly.
The crab apples out here. It looks like we got the things on, just blinking out the window.
Yes,
Yes,
yeah, and I think that was as soon as we let Victor know they were back.
Yeah, so, yeah. Okay.
are we gonna try any grafting or just hope for the best?
We can't graft until like early spring anyways. I mean, if we want to see if that works, it would be an interesting experiment, but it would be an experiment.
Right.
I think we're all good on my end for.
All right, we'll adjourn this meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Good signing.